Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session, Staying Organized, the Power of Naming Conventions. My name is Will Ericksson, and I am from Momentum Academy and Momentum Group. So just bear with me as a few people are still joining, and we'll get started. So this session is about naming conventions, and in this session, you will understand the principles behind good naming conventions and see some examples in action. So you will learn how naming conventions impact design and styles, workflows, data, and APIs. So this is the last session for the Dev Day, and you might be wondering why I'm talking about naming conventions. It's not a very sexy topic, but I think it's one of the most important topics that we need to discuss. And so other than the fact I'm in Sydney, Australia, I decided to schedule this last because I believe it's such a good point to end on. So here are some of the principles that we like to think about on our team. So first of all, why? Why do naming conventions? Well, I don't know about you, but if you look back to the first app you ever built, whether it was code or no code, it probably looked something like this. And so this is what we call spaghetti code, where there's no real structure or order. And we want to avoid this scenario from ever entering our production environment. So here are some quick and nasty examples that I just pulled together to show what could happen if you ignore naming conventions. And so let's just say you start dragging some text elements onto your canvas and you will get something like this: text A, B, C, D, E. Or again, if you start to copy and paste an input, you will see something like this: input email, copy, copy 2, copy 3, copy 4. So these people are looking at a computer, and I think what that guy is saying is, hey, mate, seriously, group A, Z, 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 or Z, 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 Z for you Americans on the call, which is kind of laughable. So they all are just having a laugh at this guy. And here's an example of how that could look in your elements tree. Here's another example. If you don't name your elements, then this is how your workflows may look. Text A is clicked, same thing, the same thing, the same thing. So these are all situations we want to avoid. Sometimes when I get asked to audit an app, this is me, and I have to break the bad news that your naming conventions are terrible and the prognosis is poor. We need to operate now. I'm sure you may have been in this situation as well, and you actually realize that it may be more efficient to rebuild than to work with what is already there. So another way of looking at it is we want to achieve critical non-functional requirements of our app. So functional requirements mean things that it does that have some meaning to the business, but these are all the things that sit in the background that are also very important. So maintainability, reliability, testability, scalability, and security. The best developer is not perfect, but with naming conventions, they can find it, they can debug it, and they can fix it quickly. So like a good sports team, naming conventions enable the team members to read and to anticipate each other and to ultimately lift everybody's game. So the message here is sharpen the saw before you start cutting down the tree, and you will save yourself a lot of time and pain down the track. So that leads us to how then to design your naming conventions. So first up, there's no right or wrong way, but I'll share some of the ways we think about it and then what we do in our team. So you have noticed already that Bubble does some things automatically. Observe how these work and follow along with them. So name your page elements, text something, group something, input something. You might be one of these people that wants to delete the text or the group or the input, but these are really, really helpful, as I'll get to explain soon. Name the workflows. So do when button sign up is pressed. When you name your text elements and your groups and your buttons correctly, then your workflows also generate these quite impressively meaningful names. And I would suggest you stick with them. Also, consider using the default names for styles, such as body, heading 1, link, default, whatever it might be. But just don't go and change them for the sake of it. Consider why they are there and the structure that you have. You might notice that Bubble pluralizes data type names, so it's important to keep them single. So that way, when you read your app data tab, you don't get names like orderses, which are just really annoying. And then using things like components, breakpoints, color variables, all these things are here to make your life easier. And so you don't need to invent the wheel again. Save your energy for better things like actually delivering an app that has some value to its customers. The next principle I strongly believe in is using plain language. The purpose of a naming convention is to convey meaning. So your work should be readable for other people and yourself. Keep your names short and clear. For example, group container, button login, body large or L, workflow create order. These things convey a meaning, which is short and it's clear. And this is where keeping things by the default that Bubble provides is really powerful. And that is thinking about how things will be searchable later on. Search is much greater, much better than scrolling through long, long lists of elements, data types, all of that. So think about that when you're naming things. This is impacting elements, styles, workflows, data, and dynamic expressions. And if you name things properly, you can find them very, very quickly. You can see here I've typed in the email field input, and I come up with input, email forgot password, input, email login, input, email sign up. Now I may also search for email in this situation and get the same results. And this means that my names help me to navigate my app very quickly. This is one of my favorite ones. Keep the naming congruent. So keep the front end name equal to the back end name. For example, if you're building an app that places orders, call the page order, call the data type order, call the custom event create order, call the workflow folder order, call the API workflow create order. You may not need all of those, but if that is something you need, then you will easily be able to find things as you navigate around your app. Decide on your case. There's many different cases in coding or no coding. You can do lowercase, uppercase, camel case, capitalized words, and probably a bunch that I've forgotten, but just stay consistent and that will help. One of my ex-colleagues joked that software developers are copy and paste experts, which is very fitting. But please update your names as you do so. So this example here, input email sign up copy 2 becomes input email sign up, email login, email reset password. Then we have some idea of what these inputs are for. Now, this is a big one. This is one thing that we have matured in as a team over the last few years. Initially, it is, there's a lot in this, but as you build up your experience and look at different systems, then it's something that will really speed up how you work. So having a system reduces your cognitive load. And that means that you don't have to spend so much time solving the same small problems over and over and over again. And instead, you can focus on what brings most value to your to yourself or your customer as you build. So you may have heard of design systems. That's pretty common. Responsive systems, it's part of design systems, really. Application systems, things like authentication, logging, ordering notification systems, messaging systems, and then database systems, which tie into application systems. So we don't need to reinvent these all the time. I'll give some examples of that in a minute. So let's look at design and styles first. Pages and reusable elements. Think of pages and reusable elements as the modules of your app. Each module should have one primary function, and the names for each should be self-explanatory. For example, user profile, order form, header, analytics. Here's an example of a reusable element that we've created called analytics. And so this sits in the header and it has the function of providing some custom events into our page so that when we load our page, we log the user's IP, their location, their browser settings, the URL parameters and the page. And so this is a really handy element which we just want to access everywhere. And this is an example of using that naming and the modular approach to developing groups. So use unique names. Focus on the groups that are highest in your hierarchy. For example, we use group main, which is for our outer group that holds our padding, which adapts responsively, and it also may be hidden until the user is authorized. Group container, this one sits within group main usually, and it often controls the responsive settings and the paddings as well. So this one might restrict the maximum page width to 1128 pixels in our design system, and this means we can adapt that across the responsive page widths, and it's all taken care of. We don't actually ever need to think about that. Group wrapper. So this is a group that sits around specific content. So it might be around a form. And so that just holds content together. And again, you can apply maximum widths and things there. And so you don't have to do that on the child elements. Group left, group right. For example, if I'm making a hero, I might label the left and the right groups like that so I know what they are as I look down my elements tree. Group row, group column. Sometimes when I'm 4 or 5 layers deep in my hierarchy, and I'm not so concerned about finding group row, I might just call group rows, group columns, because I just want to remember why I did it. That's basically it. And so it doesn't have to be searchable, but it just has to convey the purpose. Remember, always keep your elements tree navigable, which means you can navigate around it and find things quite easily. So inputs. Again, give them unique names so you can easily find them in workflows. This reduces developer errors and it increases speed and accuracy. So if you had these 3, input email, input email, input email, you're going to have to do a lot of testing and debugging to figure out which input email is going into your sign up or your login forms. Whereas if you call them input email, forgot password, login, sign up, it's very, very clear. Styles. So this is our design system in action, and you can see the different styles defined here in Figma. And then once we bring that into Bubble, you can see on the left the styles tab and how those styles are labeled. And then as you go into the style dropdown on each element, you can easily find things. So if I'm looking for a body text, I just type body. If I'm looking for a body medium text, I type body M. And so it's very easy to find the things I'm looking for and work quickly. Another way of looking at it is with colors. So colors in a design system have different increments or sizing, I guess. It's similar to the size of fonts. So 100 through to 900. And these colors have different purposes, all these color weights. But you also have things like primary, secondary, neutrals, and semantic colors. And so once you understand this, you can start to bring them into the app in a meaningful way. And so a naming convention for colors could utilize the color variables, which is a modern miracle in my view. And these things make it really easy to find the right color for the UI element that you are working on. Next, we have workflows. So first up, use the default event action names where possible. And again, this really enables searchability. So if I want to find create an order, then I can just type create, and then I can find all of the workflows that create something. Use the workflow folders to organize your workflows into functional areas. So the right example there is our a bubble app, which is really a templatized app that has all of these different systems already programmed in. Use the colors how you like. We've experimented with using colors for work in progress and for review. We don't really use them now, but they're another option for visually separating things. Custom events. So treat custom events as functions with one specific task to perform and a clear descriptive name. So think of a function like in a spreadsheet, you might have sum and then a range of a column or range of cells, and then that provides the total of those values. And so that's like a function in code as well. You might have have a function set up to provide some results, and then it's got a name and you call it from within your app. So examples might be custom events such as place order, calculate totals, log event. When we start doing this, then we can break down multi-pronged workflows into custom events. So let's say you have a workflow that has lots and lots of steps. You can start to put these into meaningfully named custom events and treat them like functions. So I'll give you an example. This is a Xero integration. And in this integration, we have an API workflow to create an invoice. And so the first thing we do is we check that the contact is actually synced. So we send them off to a custom event called sync contact. And then at the end, we trigger an email invoice. So we send them to a custom event email invoice. Then we have a few steps in the middle as well. So that helps us to read this workflow meaningfully. We don't have to put all of the steps inside sync contact in here. Otherwise, there'd be about 15 steps. And again, we don't put the email invoice steps here. Otherwise, you probably have 20 steps by the time we finish this workflow. So instead, we use custom events like functions. Next, the database. So when naming data types, use the single, not the pluralized names. So use order and not orders. Otherwise, you get orderses when you go to your app data tab. The names should convey the meaning of one row of data. Now, this is really interesting. We're working on a project now where we have to produce reports of one vehicle, of an installation of a device on a vehicle. So the question is the data type named vehicle or is it named report? And so I would argue it's report because the row of data represents one form that's submitted at one point in time, which represents the installation of a device on a vehicle. Now, the client wants to use it partly as vehicle as well as a database of vehicles, but I've encouraged them to think about it more to mean one point in time where that installation has occurred. Keep it short and consider using prefixes to group related data. For example, order line item. Then they appear nicely in your alphabetical sort. Fields. Don't repeat the data type name in the field. For example, orders, order total. Orders total is fine. The name should convey the meaning of the field. For example, orders base price, excluding tax, versus orders price. Name field names and front-end labels consistently. And use and reuse standardized field names. So here's some examples of standard data type names we use across many of our apps: invitation, message, notification, order, product, line item, profile, product category, process, subscription, tag. And here's some examples of standard field names: name, description, order by, deleted, type, status, start date, end date, role. And because we understand how all of these standard fields work, it makes it really easy to jump in and work with the apps that other colleagues have made. Option sets, we have a naming convention of putting the suffix OS after the option set, so user role OS. And that helps us to differentiate between similar sounding data types in the dynamic expression creator. We also prefer to make the display field URL friendly, so make it edit profile, and then also create a label attribute edit profile in the way you'd show that on the UI. And the reason for that is that we can use the OS, the option set display in the URL parameter without it becoming ugly and full of escape characters and things like that. Sometimes it can be helpful to put a text string on your element to make it easier to find in searches. So let's just say you've got a bunch of groups that all have a calculation on them, and then you're showing those in a text. You might want to add VAR for variable or whatever you decide in the name. So you can just come along and type VAR, and then you see all of those groups very easily accessible. Here's an example of our analytics module. So we have a log data, a log error, a log event, and a log navigation. And so we just come along and search for log, and we can easily find those data types. API workflows. API connector. So use a short and descriptive name, such as create customer, get orders, update invoice, send message. So here's an example from Slack. So the API name is Slack. The name of the workflow or the API call is send message. And so then when I want to search for that, I just come along, type Slack, and then straight away I can find all of my notifications related to Slack. I should also mention the API workflows. So you do have to use lowercase and no spaces because these can be called as an external API call. Emojis. They can be very handy. They can add a nice visual layer to your names. We give fields, data types, and workflows that we've flagged for deletion at some point in time in the future with this stop or whatever that emoji is, a nice big red one. And so that just helps us to know, okay, are we still using this field that we've deprecated anywhere? We also give our calculated fields the gear prefix, and that's usually a field that's calculated by a database trigger, or since the change in pricing model, more often it's now a front-end workflow. So it could be full name, search value, status text. And the status text there is helpful when you're trying to sort your database table. Okay, this is the fun one. Your app is not a frat house, a mad scientist lab, or a teenager's bedroom. So clean up as you go. And I hear you all say, yes, Dad. So in summary, naming conventions provide a meaning so we can build maintainable apps and we can build faster. So remember, don't fight the tool. Naming must be searchable, and use standards and systems to make your life a lot easier. Here's some ways you can contact me. So I'm on LinkedIn primarily. I'm not a huge Twitter X user, so I really prefer LinkedIn. There's our email, our current website, and we do have regular emails going out about Bubble and things like we've talked about now. And also check out our 90-day course on that website. So I might just pause and have a look in the chat and just see if there's any questions there, and feel free to put something in the last few minutes. Sarah says, how do you use it if using the data API? Well, I haven't used emojis in the data API, so I can't really answer that question. Sorry, Sarah. Anyone else who's got an answer, feel free to put it in the chat there. Gleb says, you talked about the importance of making elements easy to find. If you have 20 inputs for related tasks, how do you recommend we name them to ensure the right one can be easily identified? perhaps we should include a hierarchy in the name, such as group name, input name. Yeah, I think putting prefixes on is really helpful. So if you've got a calculated field or order totals, you might have the word total at the beginning or the gear. But I definitely think grouping your names, grouping your groups or your inputs or whatever it might be using some sort of hierarchy is really, really helpful, especially when you've got complex calculations going on. I've got a few more moments, so if you do have a question or a comment or an observation, I'd love to see that in the chat there. Otherwise, we'll try and wrap up on time. Yeah, Sarah, that's right. I think using some abbreviations makes sense as long as you know what they are. And I think that is a personal preference or your team preference. However, I do think that using standard ones is good for cross development team compatibility. So if everyone's used to using the same thing, then it makes sense, and it just means you don't have to go around and change everything that you do. You can just use Bubble's default, so you don't have an extra workload step there for yourself. The status text from Kelly. So what I'm meaning there, let's say you have a table and you want to sort that table. One of the problems is we can't sort by an option set. So we might copy the display status or the label of the status into our same data type as a text field. So we can use the text to sort by that text field. That's one of the things with Bubble that is sometimes annoying is that you can't always easily sort or filter by peripheral fields when you are doing a list, displaying a repeating group. And so having it as a text can sometimes make your reading very efficient. So Kelly, what I mean is I'm copying the text of the option set into a plain text field onto that data type. So yes, the data type would have status, which is an option set, and then it would have status in brackets text, which is a text field, and then sort by the text field. Yeah, I think that's a good point, Lucas. Like I was actually looking at our Academy site and I was just looking at the hierarchy there. And so I've got, say, group hero, group pitch, group benefits, group about, group curriculum, testimonials, blah, 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 blah. And that is certainly a much better, more readable elements tree than just having like group main, group container down the page. Again, that's that concept of a prefix. So group hero or group container hero, group container pitch. You could go down that approach as well. We have done some prefixes on our reusable elements as well. For example, form. But that again, something we've experimented with and we use from time to time. Is there any last questions before we wrap up now that we're at time? Okay, so thanks so much for joining us. I hope you've had a good session and also a great dev day and you've learned a lot. I will be making this recording available so you can have a look later on. And yeah, have a great day, night, evening, morning, wherever you might be in the world. So thank you and see you soon.